Welcome to our Candidates Forum for Executive Council candidates in New Hampshire's District 2. I'm Don Bryant. I will be your moderator for this evening's forum. Before we get started, just a reminder, our forum is being recorded and is also being broadcast live on the Greater Dover Chamber of Commerce Facebook page. On behalf of the Greater Dover Chamber of Commerce, the Falls Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce, and New Hampshire Listens, we thank you for joining us for this Executive Council Candidate Forum. We look forward to getting to know the 7 candidates who were able to join us this evening. As a reminder, we will hold a similar forum tomorrow evening from 6:30 to 8 o'clock with the candidates for Strafford County Sheriff. We'll start off this evening with 2-minute opening statements from each of our candidates. I will then be posing questions to the candidates that were gathered by New Hampshire Listens prior to the forum. We will then open up questions to all of you. If you are joining us on Zoom, please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. If you're on Facebook, you can post your questions in the comment section. Chamber and New Hampshire Listen staff will then relay your questions to me and I will further them on to the candidates. We will wrap this up strictly at 8 o'clock this evening. Candidates, we begin with the opening statements, and again, please keep your remarks to 2 minutes. We proceed in alphabetical order by last name, and we hear first from Jim Beard.
Hello, and again, thank you, the Chambers of Commerce, and also for you moderating, Don. My name is Jim Beard. I was born in Keene, New Hampshire, a New Hampshire native. My professional career I spent in aviation, both as a pilot and also representing aircraft manufacturers, sales and marketing, beginning with de Havilland Aircraft of Canada. I was based in London, and I cut my teeth working in the Middle East, and that was about a 4-year stint. Following that, I came back to the United States, and I was employed by Saab Aircraft of Sweden and selling to the US regional airlines. I spent about 15 years with them, and then they exited commercial aviation, and I was approached by a company in Brazil called Embraer Aircraft, and I was hired as Vice President of Sales and Marketing based in Paris, France, and I had responsibility for all of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Why is that all important? Because I spent a lot of time in foreign countries learning different cultures. And when you think about the Executive Council, I would be dealing with many different cultures. From state agencies to constituency services, working with businesses across the district. I spent several years in my local community of Leominster, working first as chair of the Conservation Commission. And through that, we dealt with many different projects in the small town of Leominster. I'm currently also chair of the Library Trustees, and I've had that responsibility for the past 10 years. So I bring to this opportunity a sense of working internationally, dealing in different cultures, but also in small towns. And prior to my running for office, I was also chair of the Sullivan County GOP. So let me give you that as my background. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jim Beard. We will next hear from Stewart Levinson.
Can you hear me?
Indeed.
Okay. Thank you for having me. I think this is a great forum given the limitations we're under at this point of the year with COVID and all. I'm Dr. Stewart Levinson. I'm a physician executive. I first became involved in community matters when I was at the VA in Manchester. I had served as the Department of Medicine chairman and later the medical director for the whole New England VA system. At the height of that, I had 800 employees under me and was responsible for multi-million-dollar budgets. And I was always concerned about delivering value to the taxpayer. Well, as people have heard, things at the VA started declining. Care was not given the veterans the way that most people feel they deserved. And after meeting with local politicians, I found no progress was being made. So I met with the Boston Globe, and a series of articles were written that exposed some of the corruption, which led to virtually all the top executives of the VA being forced out. And it was at that point I decided that I must get involved with community matters outside the VA, because whether you're involved or not, you're going to be affected by the results. And this time around, the executive council, when you run for something like that, often you have to convince people what the job entails. I mean, most people, unfortunately, haven't heard of the responsibilities of the executive council, but this time around, a lot of people have heard, and it hasn't been good things. It's become very politicized, and somewhat accusations of racism, with two very highly qualified individuals that were denied a position once nominated by the governor. So I decided that I was going to run, and I hope to remove some of the politicizing from the council. Anyway, Stewart Levinson, thank you for having me on.
Dr. Levinson, thank you. Next, we will hear from Leah Plunkett.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Leah Plunkett. I'm a mom of 2 young kids. I live in Concord with them and my husband. My husband grew up over on the seacoast, going back to his mom's growing up there as well. And we are a working family in this with everyone else right now, trying to navigate life through the global pandemic when we have such a breakdown in our ability to provide public education and public safety and public health. I decided to run for this office late last summer, early in the fall, after spending more than 10 years on Planned Parenthood boards, most recently as the chair of the Planned Parenthood New Hampshire Action Fund. And I feel passionately about making sure that we protect our state courts and their ability to interpret the law to protect reproductive freedom and other individual freedoms. Also, as a former legal aid and former consumer rights lawyer, I am committed to making sure that we have competent, ideally courageous, heads of state agencies, and that we have fiscal decisions that are both ethical and practical. I'm so proud to be the only candidate in this crowded and competitive field endorsed by Planned Parenthood New Hampshire Action Fund PAC and the NEA, of which I've been a longtime member. I have been a professor at UNH Law for the past 7 years and recently an associate dean. I'm on leave for this academic year to teach down at Harvard Law School, where I am quarterbacking their transition to a fully remote online education program. And I believe that the Executive Council is long overdue for a working mom of young kids, a fierce feminist, and a law professor on the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah Plunkett. Next, we will hear from John Shea.
Can't hear him.
Mr. Shea, could you unmute yourself, please?
I can do it. All right, he's good. You're all set, John. Go ahead. I unmuted you. Start over, please. We're still not getting him.
He has to unmute.
Yeah, he has to do it. John?
Mute myself.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay. I served on the Keene City Council for 6 years, state rep 2 years, executive council 4 years, first Democrat I was told to ever hold that council seat. And I've been the town of Nelson treasurer now through 2021. Veteran, scoutmaster, Keene Little League commissioner, ancient honor of Hibernians and Knights of Columbus. I conducted over 19 public hearings on the 10-year highway program. I conducted district health councils in conjunction with Ray Burton on 2 of them. Public hearings on property taken. It takes 2 councilors to show up when the highway is going to take property for construction work. Worked with Burton, Ray Lazark, and Deb Pignatelli. I visited over 67 communities as that were part of the council of that district. I visited police, fire, individual organizations to want to find out what the council did. And I got really concerned at this point because I found out that all the candidates have full-time jobs, do not intend to visit the people, 49 communities that we're in. So I'm trying to figure out who they represent on the council. But I am 24/7 and willing to travel. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, John Shea. Next, we will hear from Emmett Soldati.
Thank you, Chambers. Thank you, Evan, for tuning in, and happy Recovery Awareness Month. It is so crucial that we raise a flag for those that are still struggling with substance use disorders or starting their journey or long into their journey of recovery. Today, I'm celebrating 10 years of sobriety for myself, and I'm so grateful to be celebrating that with so many leaders in our state. My name is Emmett Soldati. I'm a small business owner in my hometown of Somersworth, New Hampshire. I started at the age of 6 with a lemonade stand on the corner of Washington and Main. Then I worked a little bit at Market Basket, which is a rite of passage here. And then at 16, I worked at the Greater Somersworth Chamber of Commerce. And that was my first experience to recognize that being a small business owner, in particular a Main Street business owner, is a viable future for someone, even in a community in Somersworth. And so after finishing my master's degree at the London School of Economics, I moved home to open a small business. And as many of the folks that are members of the chamber will know, if you run a company, no matter how big or small in the state of New Hampshire, it makes you political. You have to interface with agencies like the Department of Revenue Administration and the Department of Health and Human Services. You have to be concerned about where your employees are going to come from when we have full employment. And you're going to be concerned where your employees can find public transportation or affordable housing to be able to be part of the community, part of your place of employment. And so that for me is how I became political and active in the Democratic Party, is recognizing that though people weren't looking at a community like Somersworth as the future, I saw something special in here. We had a very vibrant community that celebrated the LGBTQ community, celebrated those in recovery, celebrated immigrant and new Americans, and we have built a model for success in the Tri-City region that the rest of New Hampshire needs to have access to. When we look at the Executive Council, for too long, the constituents are just in the Central Corridor. I'm the only candidate running from Somersworth. I'm the only candidate running from Stratford County to represent the needs from public transportation to the people that we put in our courtrooms and on agencies to make sure that all Grand Staters have access to the awesome potential of New Hampshire's next generation. Check out emmettsoldati.com for more information, and I hope to earn your vote on September 8th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmett Soldati. Next, we will hear from Craig Thompson.
Hey folks, super nice to be here, and it's especially nice to have the Republican candidates as well, because I don't know if I speak for all of the Democratic candidates, but I feel like we've done this so many times. Surely we are sick of hearing from each other and listening to each other. So I appreciate having the Republican candidates here this evening as well. I'm a farmer, a small business owner, state legislator, and father from Cheshire County, just outside of Keene, a little town called Harrisville of about 800 people. And, you know, I got into this race back in January because when I looked at the rest of the field, I thought, you know, we need some diversity in this race. We need some people with different backgrounds, not just lawyers and lobbyists, and people from Concord, but people from outside of Concord as well. Because something that I've learned in the State House is how hard it is to get traction for the issues that affect those of us outside of the Capitol. That goes for the areas down towards the seacoast where the PFAS water contamination is an issue. It goes for issues in the western part of the state, like the basic quality of our roads and the quality of our internet and cell service. In the State House, I've sponsored a variety of creative and innovative legislation and dealt with a vast number of issues. In doing so, I've come to really appreciate the breadth and width of the important topics we have to deal with every step of the way, whether it's in the legislature or on the Executive Council. From the Executive Council, I will prioritize increasing wages for New Hampshire workers and fighting the climate crisis. That one in particular, well, those two in particular are issues for me because as a small business owner, I don't just talk the talk on a living wage, I walk the walk and actually pay a living wage. And the climate crisis is something I see every day in our orchards and our hayfields. It's not something that to me is on the news. It's something that we need to address now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Craig Thompson. And last, we will hear from Cindy Warmington.
Hi, I'm Cindy Warmington, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight. I thank you all for hosting this event. I would bring 40 years of healthcare experience to the Executive Council, 20 as a healthcare attorney. I chair the health law section at Shaheen and Gordon, and 20 before that in hospital laboratories, hospital business office management. And currently we have no one on the Executive Council with a healthcare background, despite that it is the largest share of our state budget, and despite that we are facing a public health crisis. The Executive Council has a critical role to play. I got into this race because everything is at stake in this election. Healthcare, education, climate, workers' rights, the right to choose, the right to vote, the right to marry the one you love. Everything is at stake in this election. And we need to each of us stand up and do what we can. I was the first in my family to ever go to college. And I worked my way through college as a phlebotomist, drawing blood at my local hospital. And I worked 30 hours a week to put myself through school, and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Medical Technology. That's my first job that brought me to New Hampshire. I took a job up at Lakes Region General Hospital in the laboratory. And from there, I moved up. I got a master's in business administration, later a law degree. And I believe that we need to put someone with a healthcare background on the Executive Council that will advocate for healthcare for all, and who can put the power of the Executive Council to work for the people of New Hampshire. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we've heard from the candidates. We'll now pose questions to the candidates. These are the questions that were gathered prior to this forum by New Hampshire Listens. And I'm going to start the questioning with Cindy Warmington. So, Cindy, how will you think about balancing deference to the expertise of state agencies with your responsibility to represent the general public as you make your decisions?
I have talked many times in this campaign about how we can really put the contracting process to work for the people of New Hampshire. I sat down when I started this campaign with current Executive Counselor Andy Valinsky and asked him about how much of a difference he's been able to make in the contracting process. And he explained that it's really difficult because they get the contracts on Friday night, they vote on Wednesday morning. By the time you ask the questions, the contracts are already fully negotiated. It's an up or down vote. We can get into those state agencies and start talking to them earlier, and we can start asking those important questions at a time when it could meaningfully impact the contracting process. And when you talk about deference, this is actually a much more respectful process to our state employees. I've spoken with commissioners of agencies who've told me that not only can this happen, but it should happen. And currently our state employees work in the dark to prepare contracts that might get rejected by the Executive Council. We could give them that earlier direction and be respectful of them in the process and really put this council's power to work for the people. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Next question we will pose to Craig Thompson. How will you think about the challenge of balancing your own vision for New Hampshire with the diverse interests and aspirations of the citizens living in District 2?
So, I have a tagline for this campaign. It's live free and thrive. My campaign for House 2 years ago, we had a tagline that was cultivating common ground. I think both of those are applicable to this race, because really our job as elected officials is to serve everybody, not just Democrats or not just Republicans, but all Granite Staters. And I've taken that role very closely to heart as a New Hampshire House legislator. When I get a request from a constituent for help, it's not, hey, I'm a Democrat too, will you help me get my employment benefits? It's, hey, I need help. And I think that's important to remember. We all have issues that we want to advance, but at the end of the day, we're public servants and we serve all of the voters, not just some of the voters.
All right, thank you very much. Next question posed to Emmett Soldati. course, we all know that the Executive Council approves nominations put forth by the governor. In your estimation, when is it appropriate to block a nomination?
Well, certainly if they're unfit to serve, that is when we block. I don't believe that the Executive Council exists to be a rubber stamp for the governor, regardless of what party they serve. At the end of the day, we have an Executive Council because we have constituents. And many people have spoken to this. Less than a third of Granite Staters have heard of the Executive Council, which means that for far too long, our Executive Councilors have been okay with less than a third of their own constituents knowing what they're up to. I'm not so much worried about what the governor needs or wants. I'm worried about what my constituents want. And if I have organizations or groups that are telling me that someone is unqualified, they are unfit, they will do disaster to an agency, a commission, or a courtroom, then those are the voices I want to listen to. We heard a lot when Gordon MacDonald was put forward to be nominated for the Supreme Court Chief Justice that we should listen to the lawyers because the lawyers want him there. I don't want to listen to the lawyers. I want to listen to folks that work in reproductive justice organizations like Planned Parenthood, the Joan G. Lovering Center, and folks that know what it's like not to actually have reproductive access in places like the Tri-Cities. Those are the constituencies that I listen to. Those are the ones that I speak to. They will be the ones to decide whether or not a governor gets their way on a nomination.
All right, thank you. John Shea, this question is to you. When, in your estimation, is it appropriate to block a contract being awarded by the Executive Council?
It's kind of interesting we're talking about contracts because most of the people running seem to think that they can get involved with the drawing up of the contracts. That's a different operation totally. We're there covering the expense of money. The bid may be too low. It might be someone bidding a third of what was the apparent price we were thinking of originally. They may not have sent out the bid request to vendors right in the same district and want to know, you would want to know why they didn't do that. The spread in bids could indicate a financial difficulty with the contractor. Were there alternates? You want to find out, were there alternate bids and did all the bidders have the opportunity to quote, re-quote? A lot of things happen and we find out, fortunately early enough, that some contractors have failed contracts in the past, and you can find that out as you talk to the people that prepare these and ask why so-and-so wasn't awarded the contract when he in fact was a low bidder. There are many reasons. That would be the prime one though, an underbid of someone just trying to finance the project and hope he gets another one to carry him through. You would reject that kind of a bid. It's too low.
All right, thank you very much. Leah Plunkett, this question is to you. How might you advocate for minorities and women to fill important roles in our state agencies?
Such an important role for the Executive Council to play. The Executive Council has been around for over 300 years, has only had a handful of women on it in its history, has not had the kind of racial and ethnic diversity that it should have, and we see the same thing happening at our agencies and in our courts. As an executive counselor, you have remarkable power in terms of mentoring and lifting up folks from communities so that you are putting them in positions of access to decision-making and power. You also have where the rubber meets the road, voting power. And so if you're seeing a bunch of nominations coming in that do not reflect the gender and racial and ethnic and religious and other forms of crucial diversity in the Granite State, you have the ability to not proceed with a nomination if you're not ultimately getting a well-rounded, fully inclusive and equitable suite of folks filling roles across agencies or courts or otherwise. I'm very proud of my record of service with Planned Parenthood, of my role as a current trustee on the ACLU, and being on the record the whole time I've been in the Granite State about the importance of standing up for women and other folks from underrepresented communities.
All right, thank you very much. For Stewart Levinson, to what extent does an executive counselor have the authority to require particular outcomes or promote particular causes like diversity in hiring, sustainability, or livable wages, for example?
Well, that's a good question, because the executive council's job is to approve contracts that are good values for the state and approve nominees. And I just want to make it clear that contracts do not have to be voted yay or nay on the spot. If you find the contract has questions and that you're concerned, you could always vote to table it. And the council does have a fine tradition of actually deferring to one or two members, at least it has before it's become politicized, so that further study can be undertaken. I mean, there have been very good opportunities to forward diversity and racial justice during these trying times. And unfortunately, the council has acted in the contrary. This can change when we get good candidates and show definitively, and they should get a fair hearing. I mean, one nomination, he was delayed for so long, he withdrew because he wasn't getting a fair hearing, and it just made the council look racist. This is what happened when the three Democrats voted in lockstep, and not one would break ranks to vote to confirm a minority candidate of excellent reputation and training.
All right, thank you very much. And a question to Jim Beard. What would be your process for vetting candidates and also for vetting contracts that come before the Executive Council? I believe you may be muted. You might want to unmute your computer.
Still can't hear you, Jim. Are you connected by the phone? Do you have to unmute the phone maybe?
All right, we're having problems with the audio. Would anyone else like to jump in and answer that question about vetting both candidates and vetting contracts that come before the Executive Council? If you raise your hand, we can call upon that candidate.
Don, I'd love to talk about that briefly. You know, I've said all along that for me, there's a litmus test with gubernatorial nominees, and that is simply the question, do they believe in climate change? If they don't, they won't get my support. And if they do, my follow-up question will be, then what are you going to do about it from your position within state government? Because we need the entire apparatus of state government focused on this issue. It's the one crisis in which we don't get a second chance to get it right. The other component of that is improving contracts. You know, to me, there's no point in approving contracts with companies that aren't paying a living wage. We need to know that the companies that want to do business with the state are a part of the solution and not the problem when it comes to creating good jobs in New Hampshire. So for me, that's a very simple and straightforward answer, and I don't really foresee any way to evaluate those other than through those two prisms.
Mr. Beard, do we have your mic back on yet? All right, apparently still having some audio problems. Anyone else would like to answer that particular question? Mr. Sotati?
Yeah, I specifically just want to address the idea of nominations of a governor being politicized, because it may be easy to have something in recent memory, but we all remember when Craig Benson nominated Kelly Ayotte to be Attorney General, and then Democratic Governor John Lynch wanted to change the nomination, and a Republican majority on the council refused to even hear nominations for a different Attorney General. So I agree that we can talk about how politicized this body has, but it has not been politicized from the Democrats. What we need on the Executive Council are progressive majorities that are willing to do constituent services and listen to communities on the fringe of our state, not just the wishes of those in Concord.
I know I saw other hands raised. Leah Plunkett?
Thank you so much. It is vital that the council hold the line at having nominees who are competent and ideally courageous in the different roles. And just to shine a spotlight briefly on last summer's nomination of Gordon MacDonald to be the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, a nomination that was correctly voted down by the council, and a nomination that I spoke out about loudly and firmly when it was a live issue. And I did so in my role as then chair of the Planned Parenthood New Hampshire Action Fund. And I banded together with some of the state's other fierce feminists and activists to sound the alarm about Gordon MacDonald's qualifications when it came to being trustworthy to protect reproductive freedom and other individual freedoms. And I think the council made very much the right decision. And as an executive counselor, folks have already seen from how I spoke out and acted last summer when this nomination was live, the kind of rigor and courage that I would bring to all nominees for courts and agencies.
All right, I'm going to call on Dr. Levinson, who had his hand raised also.
Yes, I think it's interesting that each one of my Democratic opponents, or whoever the eventual one is, seems to have their one special interest that they look at as a litmus test. We've heard climate change as being a litmus test for Attorney General. I'm not sure how that would play out for things like criminal issues, other than perhaps the environment. Then reproductive rights. We need somebody in the Executive Council that will review nominations and contracts without a specific one-faceted litmus test. There are plenty of good applicants out there, and we have to look at them in their entirety. We have to look at what they could bring to the job they're being nominated for. Some are politicized by nature. Others are department heads that are there. They serve all the people of the state. And we have to represent our district and work with the other counselors to remove the politicization. I'm sure you can look back far enough to find examples where Democrats and Republicans have each politicized the council, but fortunately, that has been relatively rare until recently, when now it's been the norm, where the governor has been afraid, well, not afraid, but has been unwilling to put forth a nomination, because unless it comes from a list supplied by one of the Democratic counselors, it won't get voted upon fairly. So I think that we have to remove these one-faceted litmus tests and look at things in their entirety and be fair to everyone and not one person's individual one interest.
All right. Cindy Warmington, you also had your hand raised.
I think that to understand the Executive Council is to understand that by its very nature, it is intended to serve as a check on the governor. And so when it serves as a check on the governor and people criticize it for being political, it is simply doing its job. And when the governor puts forth nominees that are not qualified to serve in the positions that they are nominated to serve, and the council votes those to reject those nominations, they are doing their job. And we have seen great examples of that, and we've seen an example of when we did not have a council to serve as a check on the governor, when Commissioner Edelblut was nominated to be Commissioner of Education, and he has been a totally undermines public education in our state. And if we had had a majority on the Executive Council of Democrats at the time, I'm sure that nomination would not have been approved. And I think that it's totally appropriate for executive counselors to ask the question whether a nominee for an agency head is going to uphold the mission of that agency or seek to undermine it. And that is a critically important role of the Executive Council. The nomination of judges, critically important that we ask questions about whether they're going to protect our fundamental rights. That's a fair question. You can call it political, but I call it doing their job.
All right. Let me just check once again. Jim Beard, do we have your audio back?
I don't think so, but you can test me.
I can hear you now. So
You can hear me now. Okay.
I can. So if we could ask you that question, how would you, what would be your process for vetting candidates and also for vetting contracts that come before the Executive Council?
Well, I think, you know, in any situation where we're vetting candidates, we have to look at their background and their experience. It may not be a government experience, but it may be a private business. And what kind of success rate they have, what kind of administrator are they? Are they fair to the employees? Do they work with employees to promote their activities? So basically, it's across the line looking for the best qualifications. And I don't believe that it comes down to whether you're Republican or Democrat. I think, again, it's a common sense approach. Same goes for contracts. In reviewing contracts, my background would indicate that some of the important areas to review on a contract are the penalty clauses. And that penalty clauses goes both ways. It goes for the state of New Hampshire, but also it goes to the contractor. Low bidding is not something that I'm necessarily impressed with. The other part of a contract would be where bonuses are being applied for early completion of a contract. And so I think all factors of a contract are important for evaluation and oversight. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. One more question, prepared question, and this is going to be a toss-up question. How would you go about, what would your process be to vote knowledgeably on an 80 to 100 point agenda that includes thousands of pages of supporting material every 2 weeks? It is a daunting task for any executive counselor. How do you prepare for something like that? And first one to raise their hand that I see to answer that question can go ahead, Dr. Levinson.
Hi. Oh, can you hear me?
I can, yes, indeed.
Okay. I actually have experience doing that because at the VA, most of our contracts fit into that category, and you had to very quickly learn where the fat was hidden. And what I did was I had an informal group of people that I would go to for various subsections of it. You have to divide, maybe working with the council, hopefully working together. You can divide it amongst the group and cut it down to size. I mean, the attorneys on this panel would obviously know they do that with complicated depositions and such. And that's the best way. Get experts, because you can't be an expert in everything. And unfortunately, a lot of these contracts were written to get something by you, to add cost that doesn't necessarily have to be there. So I would make sure that I understood the various subgroups of the contract before it was a unison, and hopefully the council will have enough diversity on it to be able to look at each of those. And if not, you'd have to go to outside sources. And again, if it's a long contract, you can table it for a session. There's nothing wrong with that. It's been done multiple times. And unless something is truly urgent, it actually results in a better outcome.
All right, I saw Cindy Warmington's hand next.
Thank you. I believe that we need to identify people across the state that will be advisors to us in various different areas. I have already started to do that. I've already started to build coalitions. I have vast support across the state with the support of over 40 of the representatives in the district, with 9 of the 9 senators, with the 6 of the labor unions, and with Carol Shea Porter, Bill Shaheen. I've already started to build those coalitions. I've already started to reach out to different advocacy groups who will help to advise on contracts of a different nature. I read, write, and negotiate contracts for a living, so I know how to find my way through a contract. I know where the boilerplate language is. I know where the substance of the language is. I think I will find that a very natural part of the job. And I also have committed that I will dedicate my full-time attention to being the executive counselor for District 2. So I will have the time, I have the knowledge and the skills to review contracts, and I will reach out to a group of expert advisors that will provide me with additional information on topics that I need to have some assistance with.
Evan Soldati next.
You know, as a small business owner reviewing contracts, whether it's vendors, my lease, insurance, those aren't billable hours for me. That's my livelihood. And I've had to be able to turn on a dime to understand how people might be taking advantage of my business. And in particular, when Facebook totally violated my digital rights and broke its contract and closed one of my accounts down, we took them to court. And when they sent hundreds of pages of case law, I don't have a law degree. I thought that I have to pursue this and I have to stand up for myself. And I brought them to our state's Supreme Court by reading the fine print of that contract, by understanding how my rights are being violated, and we won. I'm one of the only pro se litigants in this state to win a case, and certainly the only in the country to win it against Facebook. So I've proven that as a small business owner, we have the skills to really understand and scrutinize a contract or a resume or be able to vet. And in particular, I think the coalitions that people speak to when they understand vetting a contract are important. The coalitions and people supporting me aren't well-established people in power. They aren't corporate lobbyists. They are everyday grassroots people throughout the Tri-Cities, throughout Cheshire County, that want a bigger voice. They want to be involved in the decision-making process. Those are the people that I will involve in how to understand and vet a contract.
Craig Thompson.
You know, Emmett's absolutely right. As small business owners, we have to be able to walk and chew gum every day. And we deal with these issues on a regular basis in our businesses. But for me, I've also, as a state representative, had to, for the last couple of years, familiarize myself with literally more than 1,000 pieces of legislation in each session. We do that by putting our nose to the grindstone and digging in, talking to the relevant people, finding out who is where on these issues, and getting the facts. And then we can make an informed decision. That's something legislators and business owners do every day. And I look forward to doing that from the council.
And Leah Plunkett.
I'm so proud to have been endorsed by the Keene Sentinel in recognition of my willingness to take a deep dive into complex topics. And the Sentinel said that they cited a piece of review that I had done on CARES Act spending and said that it was the kind of review that major state spending ought to receive. I'm a legal educator and I teach consumer law. I've practiced as a consumer rights lawyer. I did that during the Great Recession. And I believe that sitting down and doing your due diligence to make sure that contracts work for working families and for communities means going deep, and it means listening. I agree with Emmett and Craig on this, listening to folks whose lives and livelihoods are most impacted. And I think it is crucial for all of us to be able to be inclusive and also rigorous in our review, especially at a time where we have a governor who, as I talked about in the Concord Monitor in an op-ed yesterday, is threatening our democracy by trying to bypass the Executive Council, by trying to bypass agencies, by trying to bypass the Joint Fiscal Committee of the legislature and do things unilaterally. The council exists to be a board of trustees, to reflect New Hampshire's innate distaste for authoritarianism. And now more than ever, that need is existential.
All right. And Jim Beard.
Well, I think one of the important things is for the Executive Council is really to understand and have a relationship with the agencies that we're overseeing. That includes the person who's running the agency, and that goes down the line to those that are doing the contracting. And having a relationship from that viewpoint, we should have a better understanding of what's going into, what the thinking is that's going into that contract. And also keeping tabs on public hearings that many of these agencies will have to hold in order to address a contract. So that's my position, understand the agency first, and then we understand the constituents.
All right, and I will ask John Shea, you have your hand raised. Go ahead, sir.
We're talking about the gender and
you
contract.
think you have to unmute your computer. We've lost your audio again. If you could unmute.
Where is
I
it?
could hear him. He was
We
fine.
got
I
him.
could hear him.
There
We
you go.
got
I can hear him.
Oh, but this is the agenda for one meeting. Those are 5 mailbox carriers full of contracts. I couldn't even put them in this car. I had to switch over to this car. The only good news was you only have 2 days to delve into these things. You can't get a commissioner or someone on the phone on Saturday or Sunday. Most of the stuff will arrive basically on Saturday. State police will deliver the paper to you if you're on paper. Some people are on electronics now, but you cannot get through these things on 2 days and talk to commissioners and everybody else. It's not impossible. It's impossible to to do all that research, especially when you can't even go visit the 49 communities that you represent. When are you going to do this?
All right. I believe we have some questions that have been forwarded to us from the general public, and hopefully they will forward those questions to me, and I will be able to pass them along to you in just a moment. A reminder that tomorrow evening we will do another forum for the candidates for Stratford County Sheriff, also from 6:30 until 8 o'clock.
Dawn, those questions are in the chat. If you look at that, you will see the questions. Steve is typing them in as they come into the Q&A.
Coming in now.
Yeah, so there's one from Crystal Paradise and there's one from...
All right. This is the first toss-up question. As a counselor, how will you support our rural communities' access to and quality of health care? And Cindy, your hand went up very quickly on that one.
Well, healthcare, of course, is something I've been fighting for. This has been the fight of my lifetime. Healthcare is a basic human right, and the inequities and the injustices we see in healthcare are intolerable. Right now, we are facing a public health crisis, the likes of which we've never seen, and that crisis is putting all of our healthcare systems under remarkable strain, and in particular, our rural providers are at risk. We need to see that the CARES Act money is appropriately distributed so that as to protect rural healthcare providers so that they can continue to serve the communities that they serve. Currently, the governor is avoiding the appropriate scrutiny and review of how those CARES Act funds are spent. There will be additional stimulus funds, no doubt, into next year, and we need to look at those. We need to specifically focus in on substance use disorder treatment and mental health issues. We are seeing the expected spike that we expected as a result of the isolation due to COVID. And we need to make sure that we are sending funds appropriately, addressing contracts so that they are distributing funds in a way that will protect those services in our rural communities. And finally, we're going to see a reallocation of funds because we have a budget hole right now, and we're going to see a reallocation of funds within agencies. That is something that comes before the Executive Council, and we're going to have to be diligent to make sure that we protect the rural healthcare providers and make sure services are provided all across our state and in the reallocation of those funds.
Stewart Levinson, I saw your hand go up.
Rural health care is something I have a great deal of experience in. When I was the medical director for VA New England, we established rural health care initiatives, and we actually started an interactive telehealth system for endocrinology that is much better than any telehealth that's currently going on. And we saw what the issues were with shortages in broadband, with things that you must get around. I mean, broadband is a big issue. You can't do telehealth if you don't have adequate broadband. And when you have limited in certain areas, it also goes into other areas in healthcare. I mean, remote learning, you name it. Our rural communities need to get a fair shake at the table. Just because they don't represent the number of people, they certainly represent the number of square miles. So if you do things like increase broadband, if you work with a hub and spoke system, getting people the care they need. I was also an early proponent of the expansion of Medicaid because that's how care has to be provided to the poor in this state. And I've done it supporting areas, sometimes against my own Republican Party, but I've been very successful in bringing care to rural communities.
Leah Plunkett, I saw your hand next.
So I'm one of the people, Emmett talked earlier about only a third of Granite Staters know what the Executive Council is. It took me a few years after I settled here with my family to learn what the council was. I learned around the boardroom table of Planned Parenthood of Northern New England when I was a trustee, and the Executive Council defunded us in 2011. And I turned to the then CEO and said, what's the appeal process for an executive council funding decision? And they said, there isn't one. You have to go to the ballot box. And so we did, and we elected Colin Van Ostern to stand up for Planned Parenthood and other family planning and reproductive rights healthcare providers across the state, including many in rural and underserved communities, which still do not have the coverage that they need, but without organizations like Planned Parenthood to provide healthcare to thousands of folks across New Hampshire and northern New England, there would be even more of a deficit. I'm also a former legal aid lawyer. My clients were the ones who were being left behind, especially during the Great Recession. And I watched as my juvenile clients were at times locked up and taken away from their families because their mental health and other health needs were not being properly addressed by the healthcare system or by the schools that were supposed to provide IEP, special education for them. And so as the next executive counselor from District 2, I will bring that same fierce, proven determination to advocate for working families, especially our more vulnerable kids and neighbors, to make sure that we have the kind of healthcare coverage for mental and physical health that we need across the state. We're a small state. We've seen some hospital mergers in recent years. Some of them have gone better than others. We've seen gaps in coverage, and we really need to make sure that we are having comprehensive, equitable care for folks across the state.
Also raised.
It is so important that we have a healthcare advocate on the executive council, but we need to ask the question, who are they advocating for? I'm a small business owner, and I work in an industry that is incredibly under and uninsured, the restaurant industry. I'm someone that hasn't had health insurance for most of my adult working life. And when we talked to the folks at Frisbee Memorial Hospital in Rochester as to why HCA was buying them, I was the only one to testify against the plan and ask the question, if you're closing and selling because you can't provide for the underinsured population, why will HCA, a corporate healthcare corporate hospital company, do any better? And the Attorney General is someone that approved that deal. So if we're going to talk about rural healthcare, we have to talk about advocating for the people that actually live in these rural communities. There is over $500,000 in this executive council race, and a vast majority, a huge swath of it, comes from corporate healthcare interests. I don't want to advocate for private equity funded methadone and Suboxone clinics. I want to advocate for people that are trying to get a bed in recovery. I don't want to advocate for another corporate hospital merger. I want to advocate for someone that doesn't even have public transportation to find the nearest health center or reproductive care center because it just doesn't exist. If elected, I want to speak for rural healthcare from the needs of the people on the ground that can't afford a corporate lobbyist, can't afford to sway an attorney general, but need their medical cares and needs met.
Craig Thompson.
You know, as the rural candidate in this race, I appreciate the opportunity to address this issue. And make no mistake about it, I live at the end of a very long dirt road, about 25 minutes outside of Keene. And, you know, I also appreciate the opportunity to agree with some of the Republican candidates' comments. Dr. Levinson is right. Broadband is an issue. It's an issue for people who live in areas like I do. And it's one of the reasons I've worked the last 2 years on legislation with Senator Deach to bring high-speed internet to rural areas. He's also right in the fact that Medicaid is the way the working poor or the financially vulnerable get their health care, which is why I sponsored legislation to provide a dental benefit to our adult Medicaid enrollees last year. The governor just vetoed it, but we need to keep working towards that because adults deserve more than just a tooth extraction and some painkillers when they have a dental problem. And dental care is primary care. It saves the state money to invest in that type of thing. You know, these issues are honestly issues across the state. I don't know that they're even specific to rural areas, but they are, well, the broadband one is, but we need to keep working this issue. You know, we recently passed legislation capping the price of insulin. That's a huge issue. It doesn't matter whether you live on a dirt road or a subdivision. You know, it's progressive values and a progressive perspective that allow us to address this issue head on with the mindset that healthcare is a human right and not a profit center for hospital executives and doctors and their attorneys.
Anyone else want to jump in and answer that question real quickly? All right, we will move on to the next question. What is your understanding of GASSET and the role the Executive Council plays in setting the state's transportation goals and policies through the 10-year plan? What level of importance do you place on public transit's role in the state's transportation infrastructure and economy? And again, Cindy, your hand always goes up first, so I'll take your answer first.
Thank you. Well, GASSET is one of the places where the Executive Council, most times it's the governor that brings things to the Executive Council for their approval or denial. With GASSET, the Executive Council actually has the role of going around the state and conducting listening sessions around the state and hearing what the important transportation needs are in our communities. And we know from Stratford County, I've already started to do this, that exit 10 is a real issue for Somersworth and making sure that that community is connected to the highway, and Rochester needs a reworking of their intersection at exit 15 and so 16. I'm sorry, and so these are the things that the Executive Council will do. For me, public transportation and the highway plan is a social justice and economic justice issue. When we are able to move people and people are able to move about to obtain employment elsewhere, we level the playing field for people across our state, and it's critically important that we do that. We need to make sure that we have systems of transportation for our elderly so that they can access services. We have an aging community and people who are less able to drive themselves, and so we need to make sure we have transportation options in order to protect them. And then most importantly, we need to make sure that we are protecting our roads and our infrastructure so that our communities are attractive to small businesses. That businesses need to move their goods and services across our roads, and we need to make sure that our transportation plan is designed in a way to accommodate all of these needs.
All right, Emmett Soldati.
The Intermodal Transportation Commission and the 10-year infrastructure plan have had decades to get it right, and somehow they still keep ignoring the seacoast. Now more than ever, as so many of our favorite businesses are closing, our downtown economies are being fractured and are fragile, we need to commit to public transportation in a way that we never have. New Hampshire ranks in the bottom 5 in the country for funding public transportation. That means that the state government provides less than half the amount of funding to Coast Bus than the property poor community of my hometown of Somersworth. That's unacceptable. It should have been unacceptable in Executive Council's past. It will definitely be unacceptable if I'm elected as an Executive Councilor. Public transportation in this region is #1 for jobs and #2 for getting to a medical appointment. We can't kick the can down the road. We can't foot the bill to property poor communities, and we can't pretend that it is not the lively blood of our downtowns, of our main streets, of our small businesses, of our elderly population. We cannot continue to just pay lip service to public transportation needs. We cannot continue to pay lip service to people that have been clamoring for better transportation rights while people want to talk about the Central Rail Corridor that doesn't serve anyone I know, doesn't serve the communities that don't even have access to a vehicle. We need to adequately increase our funding to Coast Bus and our other public transportation systems, and we need to commit to an equitable infrastructure plan that doesn't just treat the Central Corridor as all of New Hampshire's needs.
Craig Thompson.
This is a great question, because living in the western part of the state, I deal on a regular basis with how hard it is to get anywhere. Some of you may have tried to drive from Keene to Charlestown or Claremont or even Hanover, and you can't do it. It's certainly not staying in New Hampshire and do it. The easiest thing to do is go to Vermont and come back into the state. That's ridiculous. And it puts downward pressure on our economic growth. It makes it hard for people to get to work and school. And ultimately, it ties directly into the climate crisis, because we know that transportation is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And we need to be thinking long-term about how we're going to address that issue. We saw a couple years ago in Dublin, just a town down the road from mine, an extreme rainfall event that washed out so many roads so completely that the town had to do a special emergency bond to raise $250,000 to fix them. That type of extreme weather event is becoming ever more common. And so we can't separate how we deal with transportation from our response to the climate crisis. We need to be focusing on electric vehicle charging infrastructure. You know, I can drive my EV to Concord, but there's nowhere to charge it when I get there. You know, we need to be focusing on public transit. It's ridiculous that the 24 state legislators from Keene either have to drive to Concord alone in their own car or carpool with another one. You know, we can do better than that. And we need to think bigger. And we need to think about how we want to create the transportation infrastructure of the 21st century. You know, all too often when I look around the western part of the state, it's clear to me that we still have a whole lot of transportation, not just to the 20th century, but the 19th century infrastructure. So we can do better, and we need to think bigger.
Leah Plunkett?
When I was a legal aid lawyer, all of my clients were from families who were struggling through the Great Recession. And I worked a lot with moms because I founded the Youth Law Project, and my clients were kids and teenagers. And not always, but often it was the moms who were trying to hold it all together and get them in to meet with me at my legal aid office, or, you know, bring them to an appointment at the local library when I would drive over to see them in a safe and private and neutral location. And I am really terrified that we are about to decimate the ability of a workforce, the female workforce in this state, to both be able to hold a job and to parent and to do whatever other caretaking they may need to do because of the pandemic, because we have so many kids who are not in school and without a prospect of going to school. And so what we're seeing is an increasing burden and an increasing isolation on families, particularly the moms trying to hold it all together. And if we do not invest now to do everything we can to address the underfunding of public transportation that needs to address the isolation that already exists, then as we try to recover from the current situation and save a whole cohort of the Granite State workforce in terms of being able to participate, we need to be making plans now to make sure that our moms who are holding it all together can get the job done.
Cindy Warmington, did you have your hand up?
No, I've actually already answered this
All
question.
right, okay, I wasn't sure. Dr. Levinson?
Yes. Oh. Yes. This has been an issue of more the legislature than the executive council. For decades, the legislature has not lived up to the responsibility of coming up with plans for either better public transportation or the funding necessary within the existing budget. And to say that we can't do this and just kick it down the road is not appropriate. And this does involve doctor's appointments, getting people to school, which unfortunately now with COVID, closures are much more common, and isolation. The type of buses that could be provided are no longer appropriate and probably won't be for the next few years because with COVID, it's not going anywhere, and you can't maintain the proper isolation if you're packing people into public buses. I mean, the technology has changed. We are seeing more electric vehicles. We are seeing things like Lyft and Uber, and perhaps under the right circumstances, subsidies could be more appropriate. But this has been a responsibility that the state government has not lived up to under both Democrat and Republican administrations.
Jim Beard?
I would just comment that, you know, we're living in an era now where we really have to go through a reset. Our economy has been pretty much decimated, and we're not going to correct this in a 1 year or 2 year period of time. So coming up with answers is going to take time. We're not going to have the budgets that we had over the last few years, which we had very good economy. And so agencies are going to have to do more with less. And like I say, we have to have a little bit more patience in evaluating these circumstances all across the board.
All right, and John Shea?
When I got on the council, the hearings for a 10-year plan were strictly within a 10-mile radius of Concord. Never came over to this side of the state, never went over the other side of the state. I held in the 4 years over 20 hearings on the 10-year plan, all the way from Walpole, all the way over to Somersworth, Rochester. But one of the biggest things, we had a hearing up in Franklin, I believe it was, and O'Leary was the commissioner, and we got talking about roads. And he said, I drive as fast as I can over a bridge, and I go even faster when I go under a bridge. You know, we got things hanging down, the nets to catch things falling. And I had a senator just north of Keene. I asked him, what happened to the funding? The highway funds were awash with money. And every time the Republicans in complete control at that time of the legislature, every time they expanded a department, they took funds out of the highway fund. Never wanted to increase taxes, of course. And this has been going on forever. And they almost liquidated the highway fund. And now we're stuck. There's no money. And this is one of the prime reasons to get the damn seat out of Concord, because Concord, Manchester, and Nashua act together, and they don't see too much beyond 30 miles going east or west.
All right, thank you very much. This response comes from a viewer who is concerned with some of the responses to postpone contracts if you don't understand a contract. When you do this, local agencies have programs and funds delayed for 30 to 60 days, which means that services are not available to their clientele. So please explain how you would ensure that contracts would be properly vetted, and at the same time that the money to local social service agencies would not be delayed and residents will not be without their funding. And a show of hands, Emmett?
Yeah, I totally agree with the questioner. It's so crucial that we don't delay. So many of the contracts that come before the Executive Council actually deal with life or death issues. And I think COVID has particularly shown us how nimble or rigid some of our agencies and our organizations in our state need to be. You know, if you're New Hampshire Hospital and you're dealing with so many patients that need so much psychiatric care, but can't either get in or get out because of funding holdups, that's a matter of life or death. That's a matter of someone's mental health. We can't just have a single executive counselor or a group of executive counselors say they don't know enough about it. We need to start on day one or even in this campaign with those coalitions of those voices, understanding the organizations that have been in the grassroots doing the work, whether it's working with mental health, whether it's working with substance use, whether it's working with our homeless and housing unstable populations. These are the people who matter the most when it comes to the expedited nature of us reviewing contracts. So I understand that it is a burden for all of us trying to be an executive counselor to have to review of a lot of contracts, but we have to be up to the job because at the end of the day, Granite Staters' health and their lives and their livelihoods depend on it.
Dr. Levinson?
If most contracts can't be evaluated for 30 days or so, then there's a lot bigger problems than with the Executive Council. I'm not going to be given a contract that's several hundred pages long, given it to me on a Saturday to expect me to have every nuance understood by the middle of next week. I mean, this should be proposed better planning on the part of state agencies. It's not that that money is going to be delayed for vital services. Many of these contracts took months to even years to prepare. So we have to do things in a deliberative manner and not just gloss over them.
Craig Thompson?
I, for one, never said we should delay any contracts. I don't know who did, but the need to act on these contracts is self-evident. That's why I've consistently said we need to make sure as counselors that we're going back to the individual departments and talking to them well in advance of the contract coming up for a vote and making sure everybody understands what we're doing and why. And I would even argue that we need to go back further than that and make sure that we are in the room during the budgeting process in the legislature so that the legislature is on board as well. You know, we can all work together despite our differences and make sure that we're guaranteeing the quality and timeliness of services that New Hampshire residents deserve.
Jim Beard, I saw your hand.
I think it all goes back to the budgeting process. As other people have said, these contracts, many of them large contracts, don't just come about in a 30-day period. They take months of preparation. I think it would be appropriate for the Executive Council to request from each agency, as that agency is going through the budgeting process, to have the top 10 or top 15 contracts that they expect to commit to in the coming budgeting year, so that we have advanced knowledge of what their thinking is and what their plans are, so that we can start doing the process before we actually get the paperwork. I don't think that's, I don't think that's something that's untoward.
All right, Cindy Warmington.
This is exactly what I have been talking about throughout this campaign. The need to get into these agencies earlier and get engaged in the process at that time will make all the difference. And I will say that I don't think it's always inadvertent that a contract lands on the Executive Council's table when it is urgent to act. I think that sometimes that is the object of the governor's timing and putting the contracts before the council at a time when, if they don't approve it, something disastrous will happen. But the most important thing is to get into these agencies earlier. And that, as Andy Valinsky said to me, is going to take your time and attention. And I am going to dedicate my full-time attention to this position. And that is why I think the untapped power of the Executive Council to work for the people is really critically important here. That's what needs to happen. And we need someone who's willing to commit their time to do that. And I am.
Leah Plunkett.
Thank you so much. I think that it is critically important that the council is prepared to do its due diligence and bring its fiduciary obligation to make sure that any contract that reaches it is something that it can sit down and do the kind of rigorous, true watchdog review that the Keene Sentinel endorsed our campaign for. I'm a law professor. I sit down and I read and digest complex material, and I use the material that I digest in a collaborative and creative and problem-solving fashion. I've never been in the private practice of law, no disrespect to anybody who is. It's an important part of our profession. It's not my background. My background is as a legal aid and a consumer rights lawyer, and also as a scholar. And as somebody who combines the insights into what working families and our more vulnerable neighbors and friends are facing with that rigorous law professor style review, I feel very confident in being able to sit down and do the kind of fiduciary vetting that does not involve substituting my decision making for folks on the front lines, but involves using my critical thinking and my problem solving and my understanding of complex systems of governance to determine whether or not a contract should move forward. I think that we're starting to hear a little bit from a couple of folks about, can we do this full time and what's it going to look like? Well, the Executive Council is not supposed to be for professional politicians. It's supposed to be for folks who are advocates for the people. It's a citizens council. And I think it's critically important that we maintain District 2 for somebody who is part of the broader community, the same way Colin Van Ostern was, the same way Chris Pappas was, the same way so many of our successful counselors have been. That's an important part of the perspective when it comes to being a fiduciary for the state. It's not a detriment.
And John Shea.
I got lost in the last three all together there. I'm sorry.
How would you ensure that contracts are properly vetted and at the same time the money to local social service agencies are not delayed and residents are not without?
I'm going back again that the council's job is to award a contract, yes, no. That their job is not to go in and draw up contracts when you've got a professional crew that do this all the time, adequate people. The council's job is to look at the contract to see if the terms were met. If all all the vendors qualified were notified. What's the reason for the price cost spread in it? All those things. The job is not to re-underwrite a contract. The job is this expense and should be authorized because it met all the criteria that the specs call for.
All right. I'm going to ask one question of all of you, and I'm going to ask you to limit your answer to about a minute. And what do you see as the most important role as a member of the Executive Council? And I will start with Jim Beard.
Well, I think we all understand, at least those that are running for the Executive Council, we understand what the requirements of that position is. But often a segment that is not talked enough about, and that is constituency services. When I think about District 2, running from the seacoast all the way over to the Connecticut River, it's a broad district. And as executive counselor, we have to understand the businesses that are being affected by the COVID situation. We have to understand families that are in desperate need. And we as executive counselors can assist in making sure that those that are in need are able to talk to the right agency to get assistance. So that's that's a very broad thing.
Dr. Stewart Levinson, the most important role of a member of the Executive Council.
The most important role of the Executive Council is to do their job in a dispassionate manner without bringing their own political agenda. This current council has just been so politicized. Money has been delayed that was necessary to go for COVID, to provide paychecks to workers. We've not been living up to our responsibilities. I mean, if you talk to people before, they've never heard of the council. Now what they've heard of the council is nothing good. We've advanced everything that is contrary to what we should be doing in the last 6 months. COVID has created such a strain, and yet we are having limited resources. Every department is predicted to have approximately a 10% to 15% budget cut, provided we get federal funding, and we have to put ourselves in a springboard position so our economy grows when this is over and not burdening ourselves and forcing new broad-based taxes.
All right, Leah Plunkett, the most important role of an executive counselor.
The most important role of an executive counselor heading into this election is to protect our judiciary. I'm so proud to be the only candidate in this field endorsed by Planned Parenthood New Hampshire Action Fund PAC. And I received that endorsement because of my proven record as a champion for reproductive freedom and the needs of girls and women in this state. We have been down a Chief Justice on our state Supreme Court now for over a year. That shows a fundamental disrespect by our chief executive, by our governor, for a co-equal branch of government. It also shows a profound disrespect by the governor and those in his party for the rights and needs of women and girls and of personal liberty. Those are not political issues. They are not partisan issues. They are constitutional commitments. And I am absolutely committed to doing what I did as a Planned Parenthood trustee on the council, which is standing up for our reproductive freedom and health and gender equality.
All right, John Shea, most important role of an executive counselor.
Jim hit it on the head, I have to say. Districts 1, 3, 4, 5, the job of counselor is a full-time job. This idea that, and it pays $17,000, which people don't realize. The legislature did not want to pay $17,000 for people going to a meeting twice a month. The other point also made was, I actually heard at one of our sessions, one of the attorneys said, we've got to stick together. The Democrats have got to stick together. That was a shocker. We're supposed to work together, not going on one agenda. It's to bring the council back the way it was the 4 years I was there with Deb Hollingsworth, Deb Pignatelli, Ray Burt, and Ray Resork. We all worked together easily, and it wasn't this fight that's going on now.
Emma Soldati?
You know, I can't say much for the time when it was established in colonial rule, but today the Executive Council, for me, the most crucial thing is that we are building leadership in New Hampshire that reflects the lived experience of everyday Granite Staters trying to survive and thrive in communities throughout this state. Now, I agree that constituent services are huge, but I also know that there are no number of hours that will be adequate enough to serve this role. And so each of us are bringing with us unique skills to bear to represent and reflect communities. You know, when the unemployment system technology failed Granite Staters, and some waited as many as 12 weeks for their first unemployment check, that was the Executive Council's role, where they could have been involved in leadership that didn't kick improving the technology down the road. You know, when Bethany Christian Services denies same-sex couples the right to adopt with taxpayer dollars, that was the Executive Council's decision to pass that contract, and they failed the lived experience. And when the Executive Council continues to make public transportation a footnote in the appendix of her 10-year transportation plan, they have failed the lived experiences of New Hampshire, and they have failed New Hampshire's next generation. I am running as the youngest Dem here because I believe that New Hampshire's next generation includes all of our communities. That means providing resources and leadership that reflects what it is like to live on the main streets of Somersworth, of Dover, of Rochester, of all 49 communities, and indeed all of the Granite State. It's why I'm thrilled to be endorsed by our senator here, Senator David Waters, and I'm ready to lead the charge for making sure leadership and our commissions and agencies reflect the needs as we recover. If you want to learn more, check out emmettsoldati.com, and I hope to earn your support on September 8th.
All right, Craig Thompson, the most important role of a member of the Executive Council.
Boy, there's a lot of answers to that question. Certainly, the most important role, perhaps, is being responsible to the voters, which is why it's so important for whoever wins this race to have run a campaign based on contributions from real people and not special interests and corporations or the fossil fuel industry or lobbyists. I certainly qualify on that count. Unfortunately, not everybody here does. You know, the other issues we really need to address are, I mentioned them already. Our state and federal governments have failed us when it comes to responding to the climate crisis. You know, we need to figure out how to use the Executive Council to respond to that. We can do it. We know, I've laid out the plan for it. You know, the other issue we've got to address is wages. You know, money doesn't solve everything, but for a family sitting around the table trying to figure out how to pay their rent or make their mortgage, it sure helps. So we need to be committing ourselves to a living wage. And the third thing I would say is committing ourselves to diversity. As an executive counselor, and I challenge anyone whoever wins this race, I will reach out to minority communities and people of color and make sure that they are in the recruitment process.
And Cindy Warmington, the most important role of a member of the Executive Council.
The most important role of the Executive Council is to protect the fundamental rights of the people of New Hampshire and to make sure that our hard-earned dollars are spent in a way that forwards our values and that they are spent wisely. When I say everything is at stake in this election, everything is at stake. The right to choose is under assault. The United States Supreme Court is poised to overturn Roe v. Wade. That issue is going to be squarely before our Supreme Courts. We need to have justices on our Supreme Courts who will protect that right. The right to vote is under assault daily in this state by our Attorney General. We need to have a Supreme Court that will protect our right to vote. The Affordable Care Act is facing serious challenges and may be overturned at our Supreme Court. The issues of how we're going to provide health care to tens of thousands of Granite Staters is squarely before the Executive Council and the legislature in this coming session. And the diversion of public funds away from our public school system. These issues are under assault. These issues are all at stake. And that is the most important thing an executive counselor can do, is to protect our fundamental rights.
All right. We thank you very much. We thank all of our candidates for joining us this evening and all of you for your participation. We want to thank the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce, the Falls Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Dover Chamber of Commerce, and New Hampshire Listens for organizing the event. We hope you will join us again tomorrow evening from 6:30 until 8 for the Sheriff's Candidate Forum, the Stratford County Sheriffs. And remember to vote in the New Hampshire primary on Tuesday, September 8th. Thank you for joining us. I'm Don Bryant. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.